You're in the Temple of the Rants, where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons want me to rant about. You can get one of these by becoming one of those. This one's for Mozilla Fennekin, who says, rant about System of a Down. I know you did a worst to best video on Turntable, but maybe talk about the band as a whole, the members and their side projects, and how they haven't made any new music despite being reunited for nearly 10 years. The actual story of why they haven't made any new music was kind of a source of, I don't know if I'd call it drama, but there was a talk about it from various band members either last year or early this year, just basically explaining that it comes down to creative differences. There's disputes over payment, disputes over what kind of music they want to make, and they just haven't been able to come together to make a full album, which is not really too surprising because I figure that's what broke them up in the first place. I've been more or less following this band for most of my life because my mom was extremely obsessed with them from the release of Chop Suey onwards. And, I grew up listening to their albums fucking constantly. Funnily enough, I think I probably spent the most time with their unreleased music because there had been, the self-titled, there was Toxicity, and then before they made Steal This Album, and the reason they made Steal This Album was because of LimeWire and all the internet piracy sites, music piracy sites that existed at the time. And they would circulate a lot of leaked demos, B-sides, stuff that sounded like System of a Down but actually wasn't, or collaborative projects they had done. So I grew up, my mom had burned a couple discs of all that stuff, and so I would hear just all the time either, random B-sides or collabs and stuff that's not even by the band but was labeled as that on these streaming sites. And when Steal This Album came out, it took a lot of those songs and refurbished them, sort of. That was also something I heard a lot of. Hypnotize, Mesmerize. So and of course I did my worst to best, so you already know my opinions on those albums individually. But when they split up, it was really fascinating because immediately Serge, who's the lead singer, put out another album, Elect the Dead. And it was something that it sounds enough like System of a Down that you have this feeling like, okay, this is clearly like one of the songwriters of System of a Down making this album, and yet there's something missing. And it's really the intricacy of the musicality. I think Serge's songwriting it's pretty straightforward. It was pretty bare bones, but he also he's interested both lyrically, thematically, and stuff in something that's a little bit different from most of mainstream music, right? So his stuff's a little bit more poetic, a little bit more kind of spiritual or political than most of what you would hear on the radio. And but it's also very digital sounding, and I wouldn't have caught on to this at the time, but listening to it now, I can tell that most of it is just built probably in a digital audio workstation, with him by himself, drum machines and stuff like that. So I would imagine it was probably made fairly quickly and dirtily, and there are some good songs on there. There's some memorable choruses, some memorable bits. But overall, it doesn't have that spark of Darren's really creative guitar playing, and that greater sense of songwriting depth, or just the raw sound of the instruments of all the band members. Well, then eventually you get Scars on Broadway, which is Darren and John the drummer's project. And that one is lacking the nuance of ideas that Serge's stuff has, where Darren is all just hard drugs and rock and roll and goofy, weird, retarded lyrics, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious is a word to me, just like a mamma mia, just dumb shit. And his songs have the more badass guitar riffs and solos and stuff, and they're more structurally interesting, but they're lacking that depth, and he's not as good of a singer as Serge is, and you don't have that marriage that made, in my opinion, their later albums especially so interesting, where the early stuff feels more like a well-coordinated band. When you listen to their first album or their second album, it sounds like a band that is trying to create a very specific sound and they're nailing it. And Serj is such a eclectic and interesting singer that he brings a really unique edge to it, so it doesn't sound like anything else that's out at the time, but these songs are tight, and they're interesting and well done. And you really get the sense that like a lot of the intellectual content of the lyrics is coming from Serj. When you get to Hypnotize, which is my favorite album, it sounds like a collaboration between two different artists. It sounds like there's Serj's parts and Darren's parts of the songs. They're both singing on every track. There's a lot of harmonizing. There's a lot of switching subjects mid-song, switching styles. And I like that. I like that eclecticism that it brings to it. A lot of people, I think, don't. I think that's why that album's probably less popular than some of their earlier material. But when you split them into two different bands, it's like taking those songs and literally cutting them in half. It's like taking that harmonizing that was going on and making it into two different tracks, and both of them is missing what the other one brought to the table. You don't get the intrigue of Serj's worldview or the musicality of Darren's guitar playing. So like both albums are just weaker than what they were able to do together, in my opinion. Well, then Serj kind of went on, and he just became like, he's kind of just like a Renaissance man. I mean, he has all the fucking money in the world, so he can basically do whatever he wants. And he's clearly somebody who is interested in always being creative, always having some kind of project, and he kind of does what I hope to accomplish one day in my career, which is just to be rich enough that you can do whatever the fuck you want. His second album, Imperfect Harmonies, literally lives up to the name. Like, it's a weird experimental album where stuff just sounds like chaos because he did not even try to create perfect harmonies. Like, the point of the album is that the songs sound discordant and crazy. And it kind of works in places. It's kind of listenable. It's more interesting as an experiment than as an actual thing to listen to. I don't like how, as Serj has gotten older, he constantly locks into that same, like, high-pitched, falsetto singing style that he just does all the time now. Because it's kind of obnoxious. And, like, he's also done, like, lots of poetry. He's done books. He's done art. He did a symphonic version of his first album. I did love the Serart album that he did with Arto, who's, like, a Armenian, like, experimental, sort of, I guess, experimental folk composer of some denomination. I don't know. But the two of them did an album together that was really interesting and kind of, I would compare it to, like, an early Gorillaz album, almost, in the way that it's just, like, it sounds like a bunch of people fucking around in a studio for a week and just seeing what they can come up with. It's pretty fun. But yeah, like, Serj's music after a certain point just feels like he's not really concerned about making anything for anybody other than himself. It's just a way for him to express the random ideas that come into his mind. I appreciate that, just not really my type of music in particular. Scars on Broadway disappears for 10 years, comes back with the second album that I just thought wasn't even as good as their first one. It's even more straightforward. It's even more just like, rock and roll music. That's fine. I saw them live while I was in LA. It was, it was what it was. It was just a Scars on Broadway show. Nothing particularly noteworthy about it. I just think that... And then you got the side projects of Shavo, who is just in a perpetual attempt to make a get-rich-quick scheme. He's always doing, like, weird, very LA, attempts at money-making schemes. Like, there was a time where he teamed up with the RZA, and they made a speaker, like a $100 speaker, that they released an album that you could only get via purchasing this speaker, which is a total fucking nonsense sham. Now that weed is legal, he's got, like, his own strains, and he's got this whole company built around that, but everything is, like, kind of jank. The iconography is fine, but, like, it's just overall, he's just been involved in a lot of he tried to, like, make jewelry at one point, like, overpriced jewelry. Just every LA attempt at making money cheap and, like, quick, get-rich-quick schemes, like I said, which is pretty hilarious. So I really think of it as just, like, they're the epitome of a band who made enough money that they don't have to make another album, and they can still tour on the strength of their own material, like, because as a musician, most of the money you make is from playing shows, and especially if you're famous, you make a fuckload of money for every single show you play. You make tens of thousands of dollars just by putting on one show where the tickets are $100 and having, 30,000 people in the seats. It's like, that's a lot of fucking money, So, I guess it would be hundreds of thousands, but not all of it goes to you. So in any case, if the members of System of a Down need a paycheck, they don't need to make a new album. They don't need to, make new material at all. They can just put on a show in LA where they live to get, put aside their differences for a night to do a job and make a fuckload of money and be set for the rest of the year. For the rest of however long they need. There's no impetus for them to create a new album. If they had a good idea for one, they could. And, like, obviously they want to do it for the fans because people would love to hear it, and they're all still making things, so clearly it could happen. But if they just can't gel together on something, that they are all happy with, there's no reason to do it. So I just see it as, like, it would be interesting if one happened, but there's no reason that one would happen, and I relate to the feeling. I get it. It's like, I wouldn't want to involve myself with people I didn't want to work with and create something just for the sake of itself if it wasn't going to give me that much additional benefit to my, to my general well-being. It's just like, the spark isn't there, so I don't know. Maybe they'll make another album eventually if they can come to an agreement about what they want to do. I just don't think there's any real reason they'd have to. And, like, they have a good discography. Like, I can't name a band that I like more than 4 albums by, pretty much, or maybe 5 or 6 if it's Death Grips. But, like, I think they had a good run, and again, if they can tour off the strength of how popular that music is, there's no reason for them to go back to the well. So, yeah, I guess that's my rant. If you want to hear my complete thoughts on all their albums, again, the best to worst, I pretty much reviewed all their music. So, there you go.